Sarah Martinez had always believed that hard work and genuine care for her students would speak for itself. At 34, she'd spent 8 years pouring her heart into her 4th grade classroom at Willowbrook Elementary, developing innovative teaching methods that transformed struggling readers into confident learners. Her Story Bridge program, where students connected personal experiences to literature, had become legendary among parents. Their children were actually excited about reading for the first time. What Sarah didn't realize was that her success had painted a target on her back. Victoria Chen, the vice principal and someone Sarah had considered a friend, had been watching from the shadows. Their coffee dates and collaborative planning sessions weren't born from collegiality. They were reconnaissance missions. Victoria had been meticulously stealing Sarah's methods, repackaging them with educational jargon, and presenting them to the district office as her own innovations. The first sign of trouble came during parent-teacher conferences in October. Mrs. Henderson, mother of one of Sarah's most improved students, seemed unusually cold and distant. "I'm concerned about the inconsistencies in Tommy's education," she said carefully. Miss Chen mentioned there might be some instability in the classroom management. Sarah's stomach dropped. She'd never discussed classroom management with Victoria, and her methods were producing remarkable results. But as the evening progressed, more parents echoed similar concerns, vague mentions of documentation and observations that painted Sarah as overwhelmed and unreliable. The pattern became clearer over the following weeks. Parents who had once praised Sarah's communication began questioning her method. During faculty meetings, Victoria would subtly redirect conversations away from Sarah's successes, instead highlighting areas of concern that needed administrative oversight. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in November. Sarah had stayed late to finish bulletin boards when she heard Victoria's voice drifting from the main office. The door was slightly ajar and Victoria was speaking animatedly into her phone. "No, Peterson, I really think we need to consider Sarah's long-term viability," Victoria was saying, her voice carrying that false concern Sarah now recognized. As a single mother, she's clearly struggling to maintain professional standards. "I've been documenting incidents of inconsistency, missed deadlines, and concerning parent feedback." Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped her classroom keys. "I hate to say it, but I think the children deserve better stability." Victoria continued, "I've been working closely with her, trying to provide support and guidance, but there's only so much I can do. Perhaps it's time to consider whether she's the right fit for Willowbrook." The cruelest cut came next. "I've actually been implementing some improved reading strategies with the struggling students. The Story Bridge approach I developed has shown remarkable results. I think with proper leadership, we could expand these methods school-wide." Sarah pressed her back against the wall, feeling physically sick. Everything she'd worked for, every late night spent creating materials, every small victory with her students, Victoria had stolen it all while systematically destroying Sarah's reputation. The woman she'd trusted with her innovative ideas, her classroom struggles, and even stories about her daughter, Emma, had weaponized every vulnerability against her. As Victoria's voice faded, Sarah realized the depth of her betrayal. This wasn't just professional sabotage, it was personal destruction, carefully orchestrated by someone she'd considered a friend. The drive home that night was a blur of tears and rage. Sarah's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, Victoria's words echoing in her mind. As a single mother, she's clearly struggling. The calculated cruelty of it cut deeper than any professional slight could. Victoria hadn't just stolen her work, she'd weaponized Sarah's personal life, turning her status as a devoted single mother into evidence of incompetence. At home, 8-year-old Emma was already asleep, her homework neatly arranged on the kitchen table next to a drawing labeled, "My Mom the Best Teacher." Sarah stared at the crayon artwork, a stick figure with curly hair standing in front of a classroom full of smiling children, and felt her heart break a little more. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built for Emma's future, was crumbling because of one woman's ambition. Over the next few days, Sarah began to see Victoria's manipulation with painful clarity. She started keeping a journal, documenting every interaction, every subtle undermining comment. The pattern was sophisticated and deliberate. Sarah discovered that Victoria had been forwarding her weekly lesson plans to the district office, claiming credit for the creative elements, while highlighting any minor scheduling changes as inconsistencies. The parent feedback forms that had mysteriously started appearing in October. Victoria had initiated those, claiming they were part of a school-wide improvement initiative, while only implementing them in Sarah's classroom. Most damaging were the emails Victoria had been sending to parents. Sarah found copies in the shared administrative folder, Messages expressing concern about classroom disruptions that had never occurred, suggestions that parents might want to supplement their children's education at home, and subtle implications that Sarah was overwhelmed by her personal circumstances. I just want to make sure Tommy is getting the consistency he needs, Victoria had written to Mrs. Henderson. Martinez is doing her best, but managing a classroom while dealing with single parenthood can be challenging. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you notice any concerns at home. The most infuriating discovery was a presentation Victoria had prepared for the next school board meeting, titled Innovative Reading Strategies for Struggling Learners. Every slide featured Sarah's methods, the Story Bridge program, the peer tutoring system, even the specific books and activities Sarah had carefully curated. Victoria's name was prominently displayed as the program developer. Sarah knew she had to act, but every option seemed futile. Going to the superintendent meant facing someone who had already been poisoned against her. HR would require documentation, but Victoria had been careful to leave fingerprints on everything positive, while making her sabotage look like legitimate concern. Other teachers were either unaware of the situation or too intimidated by Victoria's administrative power to speak up. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening as Sarah sat at her kitchen table, staring at a formal letter requesting a meeting to discuss her professional development needs. Emma bounded into the kitchen, fresh from her bath, and climbed onto Sarah's lap. "Mommy, why are you sad?" Emma asked, her small fingers tracing the tears on Sarah's cheek. "Someone at work is telling lies about me, sweetheart," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Emma's brow furrowed with the serious expression she wore when processing important information. "Like when Jenny said I cheated on the spelling test, but I didn't. Something like that, but you told me to always tell the truth, even when it's scary," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Why don't you tell everyone the truth about the lies?" Sarah hugged her daughter tighter, struck by the simple wisdom. "It's complicated when you're a grown-up, baby. Sometimes people don't listen. Then maybe you need someone they'll listen to," Emma said, wiggling down from Sarah's lap. "Miss Victoria comes to our class sometimes. She pretends to be nice, but I see her face when she thinks nobody's looking. She looks mean." Sarah stared at her daughter, a seed of an idea beginning to form. Children saw things adults meant. They noticed inconsistencies, registered false smiles, and remembered conversations adults thought they weren't paying attention to. And in a school setting, children's observations carried an innocence that made them difficult to dismiss or manipulate. Maybe the truth didn't need to come from Sarah at all. Maybe it just needed to come from someone Victoria couldn't control or discredit, someone whose honesty was beyond question. Sarah never intended for Emma to become involved. In fact, she went to great lengths to shield her daughter from the adult complexities of workplace politics. But children, Sarah had learned from years of teaching, were remarkably perceptive observers of human behavior, and Emma was particularly astute. The opportunity arose during the school's monthly character education assembly, an ironic twist that would later make Sarah smile despite everything. Victoria, positioning herself as the moral authority of the school, had volunteered to lead a discussion on honesty and integrity with the combined 3rd and 4th grade classes. Emma sat cross-legged on the gymnasium floor with her classmates, listening as Victoria stood at the podium, her voice carrying that practiced warmth Sarah now recognized as performance art. "Honesty means telling the truth even when it's difficult," Victoria said, clicking to the next slide of her presentation. "It means being brave enough to speak up when we see something wrong. Who can give me an example of when it's important to tell the truth?" Hands shot up around the room. Students shared age-appropriate examples, admitting to breaking something, confessing to not doing homework, telling a teacher when someone was being mean. Victoria nodded approvingly at each response, playing the role of the caring educator perfectly. Then Emma's hand went up. "Yes, Emma," Victoria said, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly as she recognized Sarah's daughter. Emma stood up, her voice clear and carrying in the way that only a child's voice can. "My mom always tells me to tell the truth. But what if a grown-up is telling lies about someone else? Like, what if they're being mean to someone but pretending to be nice?" The question hung in the air. Victoria's smile remained frozen as she processed the potential implications. "Well, that's a very thoughtful question, Emma. Can you give me an example of what you mean?" Sarah, who had been grading papers in the back of the gymnasium, looked up sharply. She started to stand, to intervene, but something in Emma's earnest expression stopped her. "Like when you come to our class and you're really nice to my mom when other people are watching," Emma said, her 8-year-old honesty cutting through the gymnasium like a knife. but I heard you in the hallway talking to Miss Patterson about how my mom can't handle her job because she's a single mom. That's not true. My mom is the best teacher, and being a single mom makes her stronger, not weaker. A ripple of whispers spread through the assembled students. Teachers around the perimeter of the gymnasium exchanged glances. Victoria's composure cracked slightly, but she tried to maintain control. Emma, I think there might be some confusion. And you took my mom's reading program, Emma continued, her voice gaining strength. The story bridge thing, my mom created that. She spent weeks making all the materials at our kitchen table. I helped her cut out the paper bridges, but then you told everyone it was your idea. More murmurs from the audience. Some of the fourth graders nodded. They remembered the Story Bridge program's introduction and how excited Miss Martinez had been about it. Another student, Jake from Sarah's class, raised his hand tentatively. My mom said Martinez might lose her job because someone said she was bad at teaching, but she's not bad at teaching. She helped me learn to read chapter books. My dad said there were complaints about Miss Martinez, added Lucy, a third grader, but I don't understand. She always helps us when we visit her classroom. Victoria's face had gone pale. She looked toward the back of the gymnasium where Sarah sat frozen, unsure whether to be mortified or proud. Children, I think we should focus on our lesson about honesty. But this is about honesty, Emma said, her voice carrying the absolute conviction that only children possess. You're telling people lies about my mom to make her look bad. That's the opposite of honest. And you're taking credit for her work. In our class, that would be called cheating. The gymnasium had gone completely silent, except for the sound of 30 children processing this revelation. Several teachers were now looking uncomfortable, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in their mind. Mrs. Patterson, the third grade teacher Emma had mentioned, stepped forward slightly. Emma, when did you hear this conversation? Last week by the supply closet. You and Miss Victoria were talking about how my mom couldn't manage her responsibilities and how the parents were losing confidence. But my mom manages everything perfectly. She makes my lunch every morning, helps me with homework every night, and still stays late to help students who need extra reading help. The authenticity in Emma's voice was undeniable. Children her age didn't typically fabricate detailed scenarios involving administrative politics they couldn't possibly understand. Her specific recollections, delivered with matter-of-fact innocence, carried more weight than any formal complaint could have. Victoria realized she was losing control of the narrative. I think we need to return to our planned lesson. Is it true? Asked Marcus, one of the older fourth graders. Did you really say those things about Miss Martinez? Because my sister had her last year and she said Martinez was the reason she started loving books. What happened next was something Victoria couldn't have anticipated or controlled. The children, emboldened by Emma's courage and guided by their natural sense of fairness, began sharing their own observations and overheard conversation. They spoke with the brutal honesty of childhood, unfiltered by adult political considerations. Sarah watched from the back of the room as her 8-year-old daughter, armed with nothing but truth and moral clarity, began dismantling months of carefully constructed lies with the most powerful weapon. Victoria had never considered the unimpeachable testimony of children who had been watching and listening all along. The assembly ended in controlled chaos. Victoria, her face flushed and her usual composure completely shattered, hastily dismissed the students while shooting daggers at Sarah across the gymnasium. As children filed out, their excited chatter filled the hallways, word of Emma's revelations spreading like wildfire through the elementary school grapevine. By lunch, the story had reached the teacher's lounge, where Miss Patterson sat with her sandwich untouched, staring at her colleague with new understanding. Victoria, she said quietly as other teachers filtered out, I need to ask you something directly. Did you really say those things about Sarah being unable to handle her job because she's a single mother? Victoria's laugh came out forced and brittle. You're going to take the word of an 8-year-old over a colleague? Really, Janet? Children misunderstand adult conversations all the time. Emma probably overheard fragments and created her own narrative, but Mrs. Patterson's expression didn't soften. She quoted you almost verbatim from our conversation last Tuesday, about Sarah not being able to manage her responsibilities and parents losing confidence. Those were your exact words, Victoria. And frankly, now that I think about it, you were the one who brought up those concerns in the first place. I never had any issues with Sarah's teaching. The afternoon brought a parade of uncomfortable conversation. Parents began calling the school, not to complain about Sarah, but to ask pointed questions about the source of the negative feedback they'd been receiving. Mrs. Henderson, who had been so cold during conferences, cornered Sarah after school. "I owe you an apology," she said, her cheeks red with embarrassment. "I was told there were concerns about Tommy's progress, but looking at his work, he's thriving. Someone deliberately misled me about your teaching method." As word spread through the parent network, Victoria found herself facing questions she couldn't easily deflect. During what was supposed to be a routine check-in with the PTA president, she was blindsided by a direct confrontation. "Several parents are saying they were given misleading information about Miss Martinez," said Carol Stevens, her usually friendly demeanor replaced by barely contained anger. "My daughter Sophia loves her teacher, but I was told there were documented concerns about classroom management. When I asked to see this documentation, I was told it was confidential. That seems awfully convenient now." Victoria's attempts to control the narrative grew increasingly desperate. She sent an email to the faculty suggesting that Sarah had coached her daughter to create disruption and that the whole incident was evidence of Sarah's unprofessional boundary issues. But the email only served to make her look more guilty and petty. The breaking point came when Jake Morrison's father, a lawyer who had initially been swayed by Victoria's concerns, decided to do some digging of his own. He requested copies of the formal complaints that had supposedly been filed against Sarah, only to discover that no formal documentation existed, just Victoria's observational notes that painted Sarah in an increasingly negative light, without any corroborating evidence. "This isn't documentation," he told his wife over dinner, spreading the papers across their kitchen table. "This is character assassination. Look at the dates. Every incident she recorded coincides with Sarah's major success." When Sarah's reading program got mentioned in the district newsletter, suddenly there's a note about her being overwhelmed. When parents praised her innovative methods, Victoria documented concerning behavioral patterns, its systematic undermining. By Thursday, the story had reached beyond the school walls. Dr. Peterson, the superintendent, received 3 separate calls from school board members who had been contacted by concerned parents. The calls weren't about Sarah's competence, they were about Victoria's conduct and the apparent campaign of misinformation. Victoria's final desperate move backfired spectacularly. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, she called an emergency faculty meeting to address what she termed unprofessional conduct and boundary violations. She intended to paint Sarah as someone who used her child to fight professional battles. Instead, she walked into a room full of colleagues who had spent the week comparing notes and realizing the extent of Victoria's manipulation. Teacher after teacher spoke up about conversations where Victoria had subtly poisoned the well against Sarah, always couched in fake concern and administrative speak. "You told me Sarah was struggling with work-life balance," said Mr. Rodriguez, the 5th-grade teacher. "You suggested I might need to pick up the slack for school events, but Sarah has never missed a deadline or failed to fulfill a commitment. You made me suspicious of a colleague for no reason." Mrs. Kim, the school counselor, added her voice. "You asked me to keep an eye on Emma, suggesting there might be instability at home affecting her school performance. But Emma is one of our most well-adjusted students. You wasted my time and resources investigating a problem that didn't exist." As Victoria sat in stunned silence, Sarah realized that Emma's innocent truth-telling had done more than expose lies. It had given other adults permission to speak their own truths, to admit they'd been manipulated, and to stand up against the toxic behavior they'd been too intimidated to challenge before. The meeting ended with Victoria storming out, but not before threatening to take this to the highest levels and ensure that appropriate consequences would follow. Her threats fell flat. Everyone in the room could see a desperate woman, whose carefully constructed facade had crumbled, leaving only the ugly reality of her ambition and deceit. Victoria made good on her threat to escalate, but not in the way she intended. Her complaint to Dr. Peterson about Sarah's unprofessional conduct triggered a formal investigation that she hadn't anticipated would turn the spotlight directly on her own behavior. Within 48 hours, Sarah received a call requesting her presence at a district meeting, along with Victoria and key witnesses. The conference room at the district office felt sterile and intimidating, with its long mahogany table and fluorescent lighting. Peterson sat at the head, flanked by 2 school board members and the district's legal counsel. Victoria arrived dressed in her most professional attire, a thick folder of documentation clutched in her hands like armor. Sarah entered with only a single manila envelope containing her own evidence, her hands trembling slightly. She had never imagined her career would come down to this formal confrontation. Before we begin, Dr. Peterson announced, I want to clarify that this meeting was requested by Ms. Chen, who has raised serious concerns about professional conduct and boundary violations. However, given the information that has come to light this week, this investigation will be comprehensive and examine all allegations from all parties. Victoria straightened in her chair, clearly expecting to control the narrative. Thank you, Dr. Peterson. I've prepared extensive documentation showing a pattern of unprofessional behavior, culminating in Ms. Martinez using her young daughter to disrupt a school assembly and spread malicious rumors. Actually, interrupted Mrs. Patterson, who had been called as a witness, I'd like to address that characterization. I was present during the assembly, and Emma Martinez's statements weren't rumor. They were specific, accurate recollections of conversations I was part of. Conversations where you, Victoria, made inappropriate comments about Sarah's parenting and professional competence. Dr. Peterson held up a hand. Let's start from the beginning. Ms. Chen, you've alleged that Martinez has performance issues. Can you provide specific examples with dates and witnesses? Victoria opened her folder with confidence. Absolutely. I have documented numerous instances of missed deadlines, inconsistent communication with parents, and concerning classroom management. Excuse me, interrupted Carol Stevens, the PTA president who had also been called to testify. I've spoken with 12 parents this week, and not one of them has ever had a negative experience with Miss Martinez until you began contacting them with concerns. In fact, several parents have told me that you initiated contact with them, not the other way around. The color began to drain from Victoria's face as she realized the meeting wasn't going as planned. Mr. Rodriguez spoke up. Dr. Peterson, I need to share something. Victoria asked me to document any time Sarah seemed overwhelmed or unprepared. I thought it was standard administrative oversight, but I never found anything to document. Sarah has always been one of our most reliable teachers. Dr. Peterson turned to Sarah. Miss Martinez, you've made counter allegations about intellectual property theft and defamation. Can you elaborate? Sarah's voice was steady as she presented her evidence. The stolen lesson plans, the emails Victoria had sent to parents, and the presentation Victoria had prepared claiming credit for the Storybridge program. Each piece of evidence was methodically laid out, creating an undeniable pattern of sabotage and theft. Furthermore, Sarah continued, I have witnesses who can testify that Victoria has been systematically undermining my reputation while positioning herself for the principal opening. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly believe that I would. I'm a vice principal. I have more credibility than a dedicated teacher with 8 years of exemplary service. Dr. Peterson's tone was sharp. Ms. Chen, your position doesn't give you license to undermine colleagues. If anything, it makes these allegations more serious. The breakthrough came when Dr. Peterson asked to speak with Emma herself. Despite Victoria's vehement objections that it was inappropriate to involve a child in adult matters, the superintendent insisted. With Sarah's permission and a child advocate present, Emma was brought in for a brief, age-appropriate conversation. Emma's testimony was devastating in its simplicity. She recounted conversations she'd overheard, described Victoria's different behavior when adults were and weren't watching, and answered every question with the straightforward honesty that only children possess. There was no coaching, no malice, just truth delivered with the clarity that comes from having no agenda other than fairness. Miss Victoria talks different when she thinks kids aren't listening, Emma explained to Dr. Peters. She says nice things about my mom when other grown-ups are there, but she says mean things when she thinks nobody's paying attention. That's not how you're supposed to act. When asked about the assembly incident, Emma's response was equally straightforward. She was teaching us about telling the truth, so I told the truth. Mom always says lying is wrong, even when it's hard to tell the truth. Victoria's final attempt to salvage the situation, claiming that Sarah had coached Emma, backfired when the child advocate noted that Emma's accounts included details no 8-year-old could fabricate and matched perfectly with the testimonies of adult witnesses. As the meeting progressed, Victoria's web of lies unraveled completely. Teacher after teacher, parent after parent, provided testimony that painted a clear picture of systematic manipulation and professional sabotage. The stolen teaching methods, the manipulated parent communications, the false documentation, it all came together in an undeniable pattern of unethical conduct. The final blow came when Dr. Peterson revealed that the district had received multiple complaints about Victoria's behavior over the past month, all triggered by Emma's honest revelations at the assembly. The investigation had uncovered not just the campaign against Sarah, but a broader pattern of Victoria using her administrative position to manipulate and control rather than support and lead. Miss Chen, Peterson said, his voice grave, effective immediately, you are suspended pending a full investigation. The evidence suggests serious violations of professional conduct, abuse of administrative authority, and potential harassment. This investigation will determine whether criminal charges are warranted. Victoria's face went white. You can't do this. I've dedicated my career to this district. One child's misunderstanding can't. This isn't about one child's misunderstanding, Dr. Peterson replied firmly. This is about a systematic pattern of unethical behavior that has been corroborated by multiple witnesses. Your actions have damaged not only Miss Martinez's reputation, but the trust and integrity of our entire educational community. As Victoria was escorted from the building, Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Justice was being served, but the whole situation felt like a tragic waste of energy and potential that could have been directed toward actually helping students. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in her classroom, watching Emma help younger students with their reading during lunch recess. The little girl moved between the children with natural teaching instincts, offering encouragement and patience that reminded Sarah why she'd fallen in love with education in the first place. The official investigation had concluded swiftly once the floodgates opened. Victoria's termination was unanimous. The school board found evidence of professional misconduct so extensive that criminal charges for harassment and fraud were being considered. The stolen lesson plans, manipulated communications, and systematic character assassination constituted a clear violation of both professional ethics and legal boundaries. Dr. Peterson had offered Sarah Victoria's former position, acknowledging that her innovative teaching methods and unwavering integrity made her an ideal candidate for administration. To his surprise, Sarah had politely declined. I appreciate the offer, she had said, but my passion is in the classroom. I want to teach, to work directly with students. That's where I can make the biggest difference. Instead, Sarah accepted a role as the district's curriculum specialist for reading programs, allowing her to share her methods with teachers across all elementary schools while maintaining her classroom responsibility. The Story Bridge program was officially adopted district-wide, with proper attribution and Sarah's full involvement in training other educators. The parent community's response had been overwhelming. Ms. Henderson organized a public apology, with dozens of families expressing regret for doubting Sarah based on Victoria's manipulation. More importantly, they established new communication protocols to ensure transparency and prevent future misconduct. We failed you, Carol Stevens had said during a PTA meeting that Sarah would never forget. We let someone poison our perception of an excellent teacher without questioning the source. We're implementing safeguards to make sure this never happens again. Emma, meanwhile, had become something of a local hero, though Sarah was careful to help her process the adult complexities of the situation. The 8-year-old understood that she had helped stop someone from being mean to her mom, but Sarah worked with the school counselor to ensure Emma didn't carry inappropriate responsibility for adult problems. You were brave to tell the truth, Sarah had explained to her daughter one evening as they worked on homework together. But the grown-ups should have been protecting us all along. You shouldn't have had to fix an adult problem. Emma's response, delivered with the wisdom that sometimes emerged from her young mind, stuck with Sarah. But Mom, isn't that what you teach us? That everyone has to do their part to make things fair, even kids? The healing process extended beyond individual vindication. The entire school culture shifted toward greater transparency and mutual support. Teachers began advocating more openly for each other, and administrators implemented new oversight procedures to prevent abuse of power. Victoria's toxic influence had inadvertently created a stronger, more ethical community. 6 months later, Sarah received a letter that brought tears to her eyes. It was from Jake Morrison, the struggling reader who had benefited from her Story Bridge program. His carefully formed handwriting told her about the chapter book he'd finished, how reading wasn't scary anymore, and how he wanted to be a teacher like her when he grew up. Thank you for not giving up, he had written. My dad told me some people tried to make you leave, but you stayed and kept helping kids like me. Sarah pinned the letter to her bulletin board, next to Emma's drawing of My Mom the Best Teacher, and photos from the district-wide implementation of her reading program. These reminders of purpose and impact mattered more than any vindication or professional recognition. As she locked her classroom that evening, Sarah reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them here. Victoria's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed the strength of truth, the power of community, and the courage that could emerge from the most unlikely champions. Emma skipped beside her toward the car, chattering about her day with the resilient joy of childhood. In her daughter's laughter, Sarah heard the sound of a future where honesty and integrity would always find a way to prevail, even when the odds seemed impossible. Sometimes justice came from the most unexpected places, delivered by the smallest voices, with the biggest heart. And sometimes that was exactly what the world needed to remember what really mattered.